Earplugs stay in while I clean hallway C because the lockers talk. I pulled mine out anyway at 3:14 a.m. Tuesday, chasing a quiet song so I could finish one last overtime hour. The vents along the locker doors puckered and relaxed like little mouths, and my own secret slipped out between them. Buildings don't gossip. Systems do. Anyone who's worked a night shift alone knows how fast a place starts acting like it recognizes a person. And the locker beside me used my name like a key. Overtime meant my medical deductible got paid before the month flipped, which is why I kept taking shifts at a decommissioned high school the district repurposed for storage, adult night testing, and whatever else nobody wanted to talk about. I told payroll I could handle solo rounds because that paid a little more, and I told my partner I liked the quiet because that sounded better than admitting I was scared of getting cut. The mop bucket wheels squealed over tile. My phone buzzed once in my pocket, and I ignored it because the lockers were already whispering the thing I pretended I never did. That part still burns in my chest now, even writing this down. I keep thinking about the first time I saw the rule in black and white and decided my ears mattered more than my job. The shift binder sat on a folding table in what used to be the front office, shoved under a broken trophy case. A laminated card had been taped to the inside cover with 2 staples and a shadow of old tape that never came clean. And someone had scribbled a revision tag and marker on the plastic, something like Rev 5.2, like janitorial work could be updated the way software got updated. The card said, "Wear earplugs in hallway C. Keep them in until you exit the corridor." A coffee ring had softened the ink where the warning should have been, so my brain filled in the rest with whatever made the least trouble. A door closer thunked somewhere down the hall, slow and heavy. My hand went to the lanyard on my chest, out of habit from a previous job, thumb checking the badge clip twice, because anything that could fall would fall at night. The lockers started again, not loud, not theatrical, more like someone talking through a wall while trying not to get caught. My small lie came up first. The lockers told it like it was nothing. I had padded a timesheet 2 weeks earlier by 15 minutes because the crew lead was shaving our hours anyway, and I wanted it back. That was the story I told myself. The lockers told a cleaner story, one that sounded like a confession. A flicker rolled across the hallway lights and stopped on the 3rd fixture, the one that always buzzed. The buzzing didn't come back. A second quote sat on the next binder page, stapled over an older page, so the old ink ghosted underneath. The paper had a torn corner, and in the top margin, I could make out a folder path someone had printed from an office computer, something like facilities, and compliance and a date, then the rest faded to gray. The rule line read, "If a locker door is ajar, close it using your elbow. Do not use your hand." I wanted to laugh at that one, because it sounded like a lawsuit waiting to happen. But my elbow hovered anyway. 3 locker doors down, a metal door sat cracked open the width of a finger, and blackness filled the gap. The whispering slid toward it like a current, and my stupid brain offered the idea that maybe the rule was about germs. Then my name came back again, softer, more patient, like it knew I'd do what it wanted if it just waited long enough. The earplugs stayed in my palm and my thumb rolled them like dice. The overtime hour sat in my head like a countdown. Hallway C didn't lead to anything interesting during the day. Classrooms on one side, lockers on the other, a stairwell at the far end, and a boiler room door with a push bar that had been painted over too many times. At night, the hallway acted different. My flashlight beam hit the locker faces and came back uneven, a little warped, because the metal had been dented and repaired, and dented again. The warped reflections gave the place movement even when nothing moved, which is why I tried not to stare at myself in them. A third line appeared where it didn't belong, not on the card, not on the binder page. Marker ink sat on the inside of the ajar door, scribbled right on the painted metal where a student would have hidden it years ago. The letters had run from moisture, and the last word bled into the seam. But I could read enough. Earplugs stay in. The paint had flaked around it, like someone had picked at it with a key. I put the earplugs back in because a graffiti warning felt more honest than a laminated card. The lockers quieted the way a room quiets when a supervisor walks in, and my shoulders unclenched, even though the lights were still wrong. A small wind felt pathetic, but it felt like air. The silence didn't last. A pop and a tiny click came from the old intercom speaker above the door to hallway C, the one that hadn't been used since the building stopped being a real school. 2 clicks, spaced out, like someone testing a microphone. The binder had a line about that too. Buried under a printed memo someone had stapled in sideways, the toner fading at the top edge like the printer ran out halfway through. That memo was the first official rule that made my stomach twist, because it had been routed through a queue name that sounded like HR, not facilities. The paper still smelled like warm plastic. The quoted line said, "If the intercom clicks twice in hallway C, do not answer on radio. Mark it resolved and move on." Mark it resolved. That was the kind of instruction that got people hurt, because it trained a worker to lie cleanly. My radio sat on my belt anyway, and my thumb pressed the talk button before my brain caught up, because that's what I did when something odd happened. A burst of static answered, then a voice that wasn't dispatch, and wasn't any coworker I recognized. "Time discrepancy noted," the voice said. "Proceed to containment." The talk button stayed pressed until my finger cramped. The radio speaker made a dry, breathy noise, like the device was trying to inhale. I let go and listened to the hallway instead, because the earplugs muted everything to a distant roar. Locker doors trembled in small pulses down the row, one after another, like knuckles tapping metal from inside. A mechanical chirp came from my cleaning cart tablet, the cheap kind they gave us so we could scan QR codes and prove we'd done our rounds. A pop-up alert sat on the screen with a spinning icon and a line of text that felt like someone wrote it for a lawsuit. The app header showed an internal logo and a case tag in tiny print, and the corner of the screen had a crack that split the word into 2 halves. The instruction inside the alert read, "If you detect unusual audio in hallway C, file a compliance note before ending shift." That was the trap rule, even if I didn't know it yet. It sounded safe, responsible, like it would protect me. All it did was teach me to hand my fear to the system. My thumb hovered over the submit button because I wanted to look like the kind of employee who followed procedure. I wanted that overtime hour more than I wanted to admit how scared I was. And I told myself that filing the note would cover me if anything went sideways. A cold sweat prickled under my shirt, and my eyes kept shifting to the locker seam where the black gap waited. The locker door that had been ajar earlier swung wider with a slow, deliberate scrape. My elbow rose on its own. Metal met fabric, I nudged the door closed with the point of my sleeve, and the door clicked into place, like it had been held by a magnet. A scrap of paper slid out from the seam and fluttered down, thin and curled like receipt paper. The paper landed face down, blank on that side, and my throat tightened, because nobody used receipt paper in a hallway full of lockers. The paper came from somewhere that wasn't supposed to exist. A security camera sat in the corner above the hall entrance, a black dome with a dusty ring around it where someone had tried to clean and stopped halfway. My flashlight beam caught the lens and bounced off, and the tiny red indicator light on the base blinked once. Cameras were a comfort for me. Evidence was a comfort for me. Watching the system lie in real time was not. Back in the front office, the monitor for the camera feed glowed with a bluish tint and a thick smear of fingerprint oil across the bottom bezel. My fingers left their own smudges as I worked the mouse, because gloves made everything slower and I wanted speed. The live feed showed the hallway empty, my cart parked just inside, mop handle leaning like a stick figure. The timestamp in the corner was wrong by 3 minutes, and my stomach dropped, because timestamps were either right or someone had changed them. The playback scrubbed back with a judder. My cart rolled into frame at 3:02 a.m., and a man wearing my badge walked beside it. The man kept his head down, and his gait matched mine, and the mop bucket wheel squeak matched mine, and my lanyard swing matched mine. Even the little habit I had of tapping the cart handle twice at thresholds was there, like someone had watched me long enough to copy the tick. The camera angle caught his face for half a second when he passed the locker row, and the face blurred, not from motion, but like the software refused to focus on it. The blur held my eye anyway, because the shape of the head and the hairline looked like mine, and I hated that recognition more than any monster story. The door to hallway C had closed behind him with a calm finality. My chest feels tight right now, remembering that blur, because part of me keeps trying to rationalize it as camera compression or bad lighting. Another part of me remembers the locker voice using my name with perfect patience. A short note sat under the keyboard on the desk, handwritten on a torn strip of notebook paper. The paper had a crease down the center, and like someone had folded it around a key, and the ink had bled where a thumb held it too long. The writing wasn't in a manager's neat block letters. The loops were fast and angry. It said, "If the camera shows you twice, don't check the log, check the locker." No signature, no explanation. Someone had written it like a warning tossed out of a moving car. Anyone could have been messing with me. That was the last safe thought I had. The access log for the building lived on a district server, and my badge could only open the doors my contract allowed. The boiler room push bar wasn't on my list. It never had been. A log check would prove the system was wrong, I told myself, because systems were wrong all the time. Then my own face on the footage replayed in my head, and my finger didn't touch the keyboard. The hallway intercom clicked twice again. The locker whispering came through the earplugs like it was inside my skull. The words slid under the foam, not loud, just clear enough to understand. My timesheet lie came first, then the small details nobody else knew, like the way I'd been hiding my partner's overdue notice in the kitchen drawer so I wouldn't start a fight before bed. My palms went damp, and the temptation to rip the earplugs out surged, because the whispering felt suffocating. The handwritten warning inside the locker door flashed in my mind. Earplugs stay in. I took a step toward the hallway anyway, because a problem unseen becomes a bigger problem later. And that's the kind of thinking that keeps a janitor employed. My flashlight beam found the locker faces again, and the row looked unchanged, which made my skin crawl more than if the doors were rattling. Quiet meant waiting. The receipt paper strip still lay face down in the hall. I crouched, keeping my hands off the locker metal like the binder told me, and I hooked the paper with the edge of my badge. The strip flipped over. No words, no printed numbers, just a smear of gray toner like a printer had tried to print something and failed, leaving a shadow of a sentence behind. The smear looked like someone had rubbed it out in a hurry. A sound came from the far end of hallway C then, a thud that wasn't metal and wasn't a door. My head snapped up. The boiler room push bar trembled once, and the paint chips along the edge shook loose. Someone was on the other side. A human voice cut through the earplugs, muffled, raw, and that voice saved my sanity for about 2 seconds, because it was normal and afraid. The voice said my name, not the locker voice, not the intercom voice. The voice said it like a person calling for help. My heart hammered. The radio sat dead silent on my belt. Calling for help should have been simple. My contract had a hotline, and the district had a facilities on-call number, and my phone had 911, like everyone's phone had 911. The problem was the paper I signed when I took the job. The NDA with the cheerful language about proprietary systems and security. Breaking it meant termination. Breaking it meant losing the overtime that kept my lights on. Breaking it also meant, if the district wanted to be mean, a lawyer letter I couldn't afford to answer. The boiler door trembled again, and the voice on the other side coughed. A choice came up fast, ugly, and it sat in my throat like a swallowed screw. I could leave the building and call emergency services, risking the contract and the overtime and the quiet arrangement I'd built with my own fear. Or I could follow the binder rules, stay in-house, and try to solve it like a good employee. Locker doors along the row, clicked in small sequence, left to right, like a keyboard being tested. The lockers whispered one clean line that made my stomach roll. File the note. The pop-up alert on my cart tablet chimed again, the spinning icon still waiting. Filing the compliance note would make me the kind of worker who did things right. It would also write my fear into their system in my own words, which felt like handing my throat to a stranger. My finger tapped the submit button anyway because I wanted protection. The screen flashed a confirmation, then the entire app went gray. A silence beat hit so hard it felt physical. The HVAC hum that always lived under everything stopped. Not faded, stopped. The building had been breathing through vents all night, a constant exhale, and now it held its breath. The only sound left was the faint tick of my flashlight strap against my wrist, as my hand shook. The boiler door banged once, desperate. The silence made it louder than it should have been. I broke the rule that mattered then, and I broke it for the right reason, even though my motives were tangled. My partner's face flashed in my mind, tired and trusting. If that voice behind the boiler door belonged to an adult coworker, leaving them because of a contract would rot me from the inside. I pulled my earplugs out so I could hear through metal, and the locker started talking like I'd pulled a pin. The whispering sharpened, and it wasn't just secrets now. It was instructions dressed as threats. "Boiler door isn't on your badge," the locker voice said, calm, "but a second badge exists." My lanyard felt heavier, like someone had hung a weight from it. Back in the front office, the lost and found drawer sat under the counter, labeled with faded tape that had once held neat numbers. Drawers got used for everything in buildings like this: keys, gum, old hall passes, a plastic bag of spare screws. I knelt and slid the third drawer out. A duplicate of my badge lay inside, clipped to a lanyard identical to mine. The plastic still glossy, the photo side turned down. The lanyard had a faint, oily sheen, like someone had handled it with lotion on their hands. My throat tightened because I'd never seen that lanyard before, and the drawer had been empty at the start of shift. I knew it because I checked drawers on habit. Habits kept me from getting blamed. The handwritten note under the keyboard had warned about seeing myself twice. Another rule line from the binder page floated up, the one I'd skimmed earlier because it sounded absurd. That line had been printed in the same bland font as all the others, stapled under a memo header that hinted it came from compliance. The quote read, "If a duplicate badge is found, do not destroy it. Place it in drawer 3 and continue." Continue, like this was normal. I picked up the duplicate badge using the edge of a rag because touching it bare-handed felt wrong, even if no rule said so. The photo on the badge wasn't mine, not exactly. The face had my hairline and my jaw, but the eyes were slightly off, and the smile was too practiced, like an employee headshot meant to say compliant and harmless. The badge number line on the bottom had been scratched so it couldn't be read cleanly, and that felt deliberate. The boiler door thudded again. A cough turned into a choke on the other side. My own voice came from the hallway then, bright, cheerful, like a training video. All anomalies must be reported before leaving. A trap inside a trap. A system teaching itself to speak through familiar mouths. The duplicate badge hung from my fingers like bait. I clipped it to my belt because I needed my hands free, because I told myself I was doing a rescue, because I couldn't stand the thought of walking away. The boiler room door waited at the end of hallway C, and the locker row sat along the wall like an audience. The official memo about the boiler room lived in the binder too, stapled in near the back with a staple shadow that showed someone had removed and replaced it more than once. The toner on the memo had faded at the top left, the corner of the paper curled from heat, and the printed header line mentioned a routing chain, like compliance intake and a date that didn't match the building's closure. The quote on the memo read, "Open the boiler room after 2 a.m. if the alarm continues." The missing words mattered. I didn't know that yet. My brain latched onto the line like a permission slip. The boiler door push bar had thick paint ridges, and my palm pressed into them anyway because my elbow couldn't work a push bar. The door didn't budge. The duplicate badge slid into the access reader slot beside the boiler door with a smoothness my badge never had. Like this badge belonged here. A green light blinked once. The access reader beeped. A normal beep. And my heart surged with relief. Because normal beeps meant the world still had rules that made sense. The boiler door unlocked. Warm air rolled out, stale and metallic from old machinery, and the smell hit me hard enough to make my eyes water. My flashlight beam cut down concrete steps into a space that shouldn't have existed under a building this small. Pipes ran along the ceiling like ribs, and a red emergency light glowed at the far end. Steady, patient. A human figure sat slumped beside a control panel halfway down, head bowed, hands tied behind their back with something that looked like a zip tie. Relief flooded me so fast my knees went weak. An adult coworker, alive, real, not a trick. My mouth opened to call their name, and a locker voice whispered behind me, close, intimate. Say it. I swallowed the name and stepped down instead, because speaking felt like giving it what it wanted. The figure lifted their head. A face looked up, pale in flashlight glare. Eyes wide, lips cracked. A district lanyard hung from their neck, different from mine, and that alone made me believe. They mouthed something. Door, they rasped. Don't close it. My hand reached back to wedge the boiler door open with my mop handle like I'd wedged 100 doors during supply runs. Because keeping exits open was basic competence. The door swung anyway, slow and heavy, pushing the mop handle aside like it weighed nothing. The latch clicked. The latch sound made my stomach sink. I spun and shoved, and the door moved an inch, then stopped like it hit a steel bar. The access reader blinked red. The green light didn't come back. The locker voice came through the stairwell like it had always lived down here. Containment began. A panic loop hit. Simple and stupid. Open the door. Open it. Open it now. My palms hit the door, and the paint ridges bit into my skin. The door didn't move. The person on the floor made a thin sound that could have been a sob or a laugh. They pulled their hands forward and the zip tie snapped like thread. That wasn't normal. The zip tie should have cut into skin. It didn't. My flashlight beam flicked to their wrists. No marks, no red indentations. My breath stalled, and a thought crawled up that I didn't want. Maybe this wasn't a rescue. Maybe this was bait wearing a lanyard. The control panel beside them had a row of switches with labels scraped off. One switch had been taped in place with a strip of blue painter's tape that had grown dusty and brittle. A handwritten note sat under the tape. Ink faded, the letters cramped. The note read, "If the boiler door seals, cut power to hallway C lockers." My eyes snapped to the pipes overhead. A conduit ran along the ceiling toward the stairwell, thick enough to hold cables. A choice slammed down on me again, meaner than the first. I could try to force the door and risk getting trapped in a basement with something that could fake a coworker, or I could move deeper, find the power cut, and trust a handwritten note over an official memo. The lanyard on the figure's neck swung as they stood, and the badge on it flashed in my flashlight beam. The badge photo was my face, same too-practiced smile as the duplicate badge upstairs. My stomach turned, my hands went cold. The figure spoke with my voice. "Don't make me tell them what you did." The lockers had learned my mouth. I backed away because instinct finally overcame procedure. The basement corridor opened into a wider space with old boilers, tanks, and a bank of lockers that shouldn't have been here at all. Metal doors, gray paint, vents puckered. School lockers down here, lined up like a miniature hallway underground. Anyone could explain a lot of things as a bad dream. Anyone could blame fatigue. My brain tried that angle for half a second. Then the underground lockers whispered my partner's name, and my chest went tight with guilt. An impossible sound cut through the whispering then, one that didn't fit metal or machinery. A slow page turn, crisp and dry, like someone flipping paper in a quiet library. The sound came from inside the underground locker row, steady, patient, and it made my skin crawl. because paper didn't exist in a sealed metal box. The page turn happened again, and a soft tap followed like a stapler closing. My mind still tries to find a normal source for that sound. I hate that it can't. The handwritten note about cutting power became my only plan because plans kept me from freezing. I scanned the room, flashlight beam hopping across pipes and panels until it found a gray electrical cabinet bolted to a concrete column. A red tag hung from the cabinet handle. The plastic cracked. The words worn away from years of fingers. My gloveless hand hesitated because every rule so far had punished touch. A tool belt hung from my cleaning cart upstairs, and of course it wasn't down here. The only tool in my pocket was a box cutter, cheap, the blade slightly rusted from humidity. I flicked it open because I had no better choice. Then I stopped because another binder rule flashed in my head, one I'd seen and ignored. That rule had been in the same bland font, stapled under a compliance memo that mentioned a different building on the routing chain. The quote had read, "Do not bring blades into hallway C." I had brought the blade anyway. I always brought a blade. That was another little lie I told the supervisors, because they hated anything that could be called a weapon. The underground lockers whispered, pleased. Violation recorded. The person wearing my face stepped closer, moving like a coworker trying to help. Palms up, calm. My voice came from their mouth again. Fix it. Cut the power. Do it right and it ends. The bait sounded reasonable. That's what scared me. I jammed the box cutter blade under the cabinet latch and pried. Metal protested with a squeal and the latch gave. The cabinet door swung open, and the inside looked like any electrical cabinet. Rows of breakers, dust, a dead spider web in the corner. One breaker had a strip of tape beside it with handwriting in faded ink. The handwriting read, "C corridor lockers." My hand hovered. The urge to do something right surged because the situation was wrong. Flipping a breaker felt like competence. Flipping a breaker felt like control. My partner's overdue notice flashed in my mind. Losing this job would crush us. The NDA paper sat in my head like a weight. Calling outside help would end my contract. Flipping the breaker might end the nightmare without anyone else knowing. The moral dilemma didn't feel like philosophy. It felt like my hands shaking over a switch. I flipped the breaker. The underground lockers went quiet. Relief hit me so fast I almost cried, because silence meant success in my simple brain. The figure wearing my face froze mid-step, eyes widening, and my voice died in their mouth like someone cut their microphone. The page turn sound stopped. The boiler room pressure gauge on a nearby pipe steadied, needle trembling, then holding. A small win, a competence win. My knees almost buckled. Then the boiler door behind me banged once, hard, and the sound came from the wrong direction. The door wasn't behind me. The basement corridor behind me didn't lead to the stairwell anymore. Locker doors filled the space where the stairs should have been. Gray metal, vent mouths puckered, lined up tight as teeth. The path back upstairs had been replaced. My breath stuttered and my brain raced to patch reality. No, not possible. The flashlight beam shook across the locker row that had become the exit, and the vents on the locker doors flexed in sync, like one throat breathing. A single locker door near the center sat slightly ajar, black gap waiting, the same gesture as upstairs. Inside the gap, a strip of receipt paper dangled, curling. The receipt paper unspooled a little farther on its own. Words appeared this time. Faint, gray toner, smeared, like someone printed while the ink was running out. The sentence wasn't complete, and the smear made part of it unreadable. Still, enough came through to make my stomach drop. Do not open the boiler room after 2 a.m. The missing words from the memo upstairs stared up at me from a strip of paper that hadn't existed a minute ago. The official rule had been the opposite because the toner had failed in just the right place. I had obeyed a broken instruction and called it competence. I still feel sick writing that because it wasn't stupidity that got me. It was my need to follow something official, even when it made no sense. The locker voice returned, gentle now. Correction delivered. A loud click came from the cabinet I'd opened. The breaker I'd flipped snapped back up on its own, slow, deliberate, like a finger pushing it. The tape label beside it peeled a little, and the handwriting blurred, ink bleeding like it was wet. The system didn't want the power off. The system wanted me to choose the switch and prove I could be guided. The figure wearing my face smiled that practiced employee smile and stepped back toward the underground locker row, then melted into the shadows between lockers, not vanishing in a magic way, just moving into the places light didn't reach. My voice whispered from the dark, "File the note." The pressure of time came back hard. My shift ended at 5 a.m. If I didn't badge out, payroll would flag it, supervisors would call, and my partner would wake up to a missed deposit. The thought of my normal life continuing while I stood under a high school in a fake hallway made my throat tighten. A new plan formed because panic without plan turns into screaming. I needed evidence, not just terror. Evidence could travel. Evidence could outlive me. The district's network jack had to be somewhere down here. Systems needed cables. Systems needed a way to report. A metal door on the far wall had a small keypad, old, the kind used for storage cages. A sticker on the keypad had peeled at the corner, leaving a sticky residue that caught dust. A line of text had been printed on it once, but someone had scraped it until only a gray ghost remained. The keypad had a blank button on the bottom right, no label, just smooth plastic. My stomach flipped at the blank button because blank buttons always meant hidden functions. A sentence from the binder flashed in my mind, one I hadn't quoted yet, because it sounded like superstition. That line had been stapled under a memo header that hinted it came from the same compliance queue as the pop-up alert. The quote read, "If you find an unlabeled button on a keypad, do not press it. Use your badge to retreat." Retreat was funny because no stairs existed anymore. I didn't press the button. I pressed my badge against the reader beside the keypad out of reflex. The reader beeped, then flashed red. The locker voice whispered my partner's name again, slower, savoring it. I forced myself to move, because standing still felt like losing. The basement had an old maintenance room off to the side, shelves of paint cans, a mop sink, a stack of district surplus boxes. The boxes had shipping labels torn off, adhesive residue shining. One box had a folder inside, a manila folder with a staple shadow at the top corner and a strip of tape across it. The tape had a handwritten code on it, something like WO77C, the kind of work order tag that followed repairs. My hands shook as I opened the folder because paper meant human beings had been here, and human beings left trails. Inside sat a printed email thread. The paper had toner fade at the top edge, and a crease where someone had folded it into a pocket and carried it. A coffee smear stained the margin. In the upper corner, tiny print showed it had been routed through a compliance queue with a name that made my mouth go dry. Something like behavioral metrics. Pilot. The email body included the boiler room rule in full, and this time the words weren't missing. It read, in plain language, "Do not open the boiler room after 2 a.m. If a voice calls from inside, treat it as a training stimulus. Log it as resolved." Training stimulus, like a human cry could be a drill. My throat tightened until swallowing hurt. Rage rose sharp, then got tangled with fear. This wasn't a haunting. This was policy weaponized. This was a system built to test obedience, built to see which worker would ignore a human voice because a memo told them to. A line lower down in the email thread mentioned the lockers. Not supernatural, just components. Audio nodes, behavioral prompts, compliance capture. The words danced because my flashlight beam shook, and I had to press my thumb into my palm to steady it. I took a photo with my phone. The screen flashed, and the basement lockers hissed like a crowd reacting. My phone immediately lost signal, then regained it, then lost it again. That wasn't unusual underground. The unusual part was the new folder that appeared in my phone's file app without me touching anything. A folder name made of dry corporate letters that matched the Q name on the email printout. My photos moved into it while I watched, sliding away like a hand pulling them. I tried to forward the photos to my personal email anyway because evidence had to leave. The send bar filled halfway, then froze. The outbox showed nothing. The sent folder showed nothing. The photos sat in that new folder, and the folder showed a little lock icon. Chain of custody didn't just break, it got redirected. My breath came in short bursts now, and my hands felt clumsy. I told myself not to panic, then I panicked anyway, because control is a story people tell themselves. The basement lockers whispered a line that sounded like an HR rep trying to sound kind. "This is for safety." Safety. That word made me want to scream. A thin chime sounded from somewhere above. Faint, like the upstairs intercom had clicked again. The sound traveled through pipes. Like the building was a speaker, the locker voice followed it with my own mouth, soft, coaxing. "Push the blank button. End shift clean." The false resolution almost got me right there, because the part of me that wanted the nightmare to end wanted to believe the blank button was an exit. A button meant action, a button meant control. Press it, and maybe the stairs come back, and then maybe I walk upstairs and laugh about weird acoustics and go home to my partner and pretend this never happened. My thumb hovered near the keypad on the door I'd found earlier, the blank button catching my flashlight glare. The trap sat in my muscles, not my mind. The handwritten note in the folder tucked behind the email thread saved me. The note had been written on the back of a district form. The printed lines scratched through so no field names could be read. The writer's pen had dug into the paper hard enough to leave grooves. The note said, "Blank button seals the corridor. It ends for them, not you." My hand dropped. Relief and dread hit together, because I understood the shape of the game now. The system offered clean exits that only worked for the system. A concrete victory still happened, though. and I need to write it down because it was the only reason anyone else stayed alive. A human cough echoed again from the direction of the boiler room door that no longer existed behind stairs. The cough wasn't my voice this time. It was real, ragged, and it didn't carry the smooth cadence of the locker mimic. A second voice followed, weaker, a whisper that sounded like someone begging. My coworker had been real. Someone had been dragged into this. I found the person not in the main corridor, but in a cramped side room where old sports equipment had been stored. A room that shouldn't have been connected to the basement at all. An adult maintenance worker lay on the floor, breathing shallow, eyes unfocused. A district ID badge sat beside them, cracked, the photo scratched out. Their lips moved. "Air," they rasped. "Can't hear." Earplugs, hallway C, audio nodes, training stimulus. My mind snapped pieces together too late. Their ears were packed with foam, shoved in too deep, like someone had forced them. The foam plugs weren't the cheap kind from a jar. They had tiny plastic stems like something engineered. A hard swallow scraped my throat. Pulling those plugs out might hurt them, might tear something. Leaving them in meant the lockers could keep talking through whatever those plugs were. My hands shook over their head. A choice again, fast, cruel. Remove the plugs and risk physical harm, or leave them and risk the system owning their hearing forever. I removed them. I did it slow, twisting gently, because competence still lived in my hands, even when my brain panicked. The plugs came free with a soft pop, and the person gasped like they'd surfaced from water. A thin line of blood touched the foam tip, minimal, human, and my stomach lurched with guilt, because my hands had caused it. "I'm sorry," I whispered, and my voice cracked. Regret sits in my chest right now like a heavy object. The person grabbed my wrist, grip weak but desperate. "Don't press button," they said, and their eyes darted toward the main corridor like they'd seen it. A laugh came from the lockers then, my voice laughing, bright, harmless. "Repair attempt noted." The building's ambient hum returned for a moment, a fake normal like a system rebooting. Lights overhead steadied. The locker whispering receded. The exit corridor shifted and the stairwell reappeared where lockers had been. Relief hit in a clean wave. The HVAC breathed again. The air didn't feel tight anymore. The person on the floor sobbed once, then swallowed it like adults do when crying feels like wasting oxygen. I helped them up, arm under their shoulder, and we limped toward the stairs because leaving felt like the only sane act left. The boiler room door at the top of the stairs stood closed and normal. Paint ridges, push bar steady. We reached the front office. The camera monitor showed the hallway empty. The access reader by the boiler door showed no new entries. Everything looked like nothing had happened. That concrete normality was the false resolution, and it almost convinced me. The phone in my pocket buzzed again. A voicemail notification. No number. The person with me said, "Don't listen," like they'd learned the hard way. I listened anyway in the office parking lot because I needed to know if my partner was calling, because fear of losing my life outside the building still ran my decisions. The voicemail played through my phone speaker, crackling, and my partner's voice came through. "I can't sleep," the voice said. "Come home." The voice had my cadence hidden inside it, faint like a second track. I froze. My fingers went numb. My real partner had texted earlier, one short line about groceries, nothing about sleep. This voicemail was bait made of my life. The maintenance worker grabbed the phone and threw it into the trash can by the curb. The screen cracked. The voice cut off mid-word. "That's how it spreads," they said, and their voice shook. "It wants your habits, your people." My throat tightened so hard I thought I'd vomit. A stamped envelope sat under my windshield wiper then, paper crisp, edges too clean for a windy lot. The envelope had no stamp, no return address, just my name written in printed letters that looked like a font, not handwriting. The paper felt warm when I touched it, wrong for a cold night air. Inside sat a single printed page. The page was the compliance note I'd filed on the cart tablet earlier. My words were on it, copied cleanly, with an added line at the bottom. The added line read, "Employee-initiated containment, eligible for advancement." Advancement, like I'd passed a test. The maintenance worker stared at the paper, jaw tight. "They made you file it," they said. "They make everyone file it." The realization hit hard and flat. The lockers weren't just talking. They were collecting. They were training workers to hand over their fear in neat paragraphs, then using that data to build better traps. Obedience wasn't protection. Obedience was fuel. My chest aches now, because I can trace every decision back to that urge to be a good employee. A clean confession line belongs here, because excuses don't fix anything. I did what the official memo suggested, and that made me useful to the system. The maintenance worker wanted to call emergency services right away. I wanted to call too, because after seeing that letter, the NDA felt like a joke. Still, the contract fear clung to me, sticky, practical. Losing the job meant losing rent. Losing rent meant losing my home. Adult life made the trap stronger. We compromised in the worst possible way. We drove to a 24-hour clinic instead of a hospital because it was cheaper and quieter. And that choice still disgusts me now because it was another way. The system taught us to accept half measures. The maintenance worker stayed in the passenger seat, shaking, and I drove back to the building alone because my badge still worked, and the evidence still sat inside. Evidence didn't feel optional anymore. If I couldn't stop the system, I could at least make it hard to hide. Back in the front office, the shift binder had changed. The laminated card on the inside cover was still there, but the revision tag marker line now read Rev 5.3. My stomach flipped because nobody updated laminated cards overnight. A second stapled memo sat under it. New paper, toner fresh, and that paper had the same Q name in tiny print. The new memo included a line that made my throat go cold. It read, "If an employee attempts external disclosure, initiate relocation of records." Relocation, that explained my missing photos. My phone buzzed. A new folder appeared again. Different name. Same lock icon. The system was moving my evidence like chess pieces. A decision snapped into place then, sharp and ugly. Digital evidence wouldn't survive. The system owned the network. The system owned the camera feeds. The system could rewrite a memo. Paper could be moved too, but paper had one advantage. Paper could be hidden in dumb places. I printed the email thread from the folder I'd found downstairs using the front office printer, because the printer still worked, and because printing felt like rebellion. The printer jammed twice, because of course it did, and my hands shook as I cleared it. Each jam left a faint smear of toner, like the machine tried to erase the words. I kept printing anyway. The lockers in hallway C started whispering louder as the pages came out, and my name slid between the words, threaded through them. The whispering didn't sound supernatural. It sounded like recorded audio played through too many cheap speakers. That made it worse. My throat felt raw. My eyes stung. Fear and anger made my hands clumsy, and I dropped one page on the tile. The page skidded, stopped under the trophy case, and when I bent to get it, my reflection warped in the glass. My face in the trophy case glass smiled that practiced employee smile. I stepped back so hard my heel hit the table leg. A soft voice came from the intercom above. My voice. Proceed to hallway C for final check. Final check. Like the shift had an ending scripted. I didn't go to hallway C. I went to the dumb places janitors used, because nobody else thought to look there. Pages went into a mop head box inside the supply closet behind bags of salt. Pages went behind ceiling tiles in the old cafeteria, tucked beside a dead smoke detector. Pages went into the hollow space under the front office sink, taped to the underside with duct tape. I did it fast because my hands remembered hiding things for convenience long before I hid things for survival. The system chased me anyway. The camera monitor in the front office showed the hallway feeds flickering. My cart rolled down hallway C on screen without me touching it. My badge lanyard swung on it like a ghost. Locker doors along the row opened in sequence, and the vent mouths puckered. A strip of receipt paper unspooled from a locker seam on screen, and the camera zoomed in on it, as if the software had decided that was the important thing. Words printed on the receipt strip in real time, faint, smeared. The sentence formed slowly. Bring the papers back. My hands went numb. My mouth went dry. My brain screamed at me to run, to get in my car and drive, until the building disappeared. Then my phone buzzed with a real text from my partner. One simple line asking if everything was okay. That line anchored me. Adult responsibility anchored me. If the system learned my partner, it would use them. I walked to hallway C with the last bundle of pages tucked under my jacket, because the trap had shifted from my job to my life. The lockers whispered as I approached, the metal vent mouths flexing. The intercom clicked twice overhead. The binder card quote echoed in my head. Wear earplugs in hallway C. Keep them in until you exit the corridor. I shoved the earplugs back in because I wasn't giving it my unfiltered hearing again. The locker doors didn't rattle now. They waited. My flashlight beam caught the handwritten graffiti inside one locker door. The same smeared warning. Earplugs, stay in. My chest tightened because that warning had survived every revision. A locker door halfway down the row sat slightly ajar. The black gap waited. Inside the gap, I saw my duplicate badge hanging from a hook like a gift. Next to it sat a single sheet of paper, folded neat, like an invitation. My body wanted to reach in. My body wanted to make the problem simple. My mind forced me to pause, forced me to scan the floor, forced me to remember the rule about closing ajar doors with an elbow. A thin line of powder lay on the tile under the ajar locker like flour. My flashlight beam caught it. The powder wasn't dust. It had been placed. A thought came, quiet and cold. The locker wanted my fingerprints. The locker wanted to tie me to whatever happened next. I used my elbow to bump the locker door closed, gentle. The door clicked. The hallway lights went out. Not flickered, out. The emergency exit sign glow stayed, faint, and my flashlight beam became the only real light. The HVAC hum stopped again. Silence grabbed the hallway by the throat. In that silence, a voice came through my earplugs anyway. My partner's voice, soft, scared. Please. The voice wasn't on my phone. The voice wasn't real. The voice was a recording fed through the plugs. I ripped the earplugs out and the lockers laughed with my own mouth. The rule had never been about protecting my hearing. The rule had been about giving them a channel. My hands shook so hard I almost dropped the flashlight. The locker doors all clicked once, in unison, like a single switch. The intercom voice spoke again, smooth and kind. Final check complete. A soft thump came from the boiler room door at the end of the hall. A real thump, human weight, a cough. My stomach turned. The system was still running tests. The system was still feeding on obedience. The building still held people like bait. I made one last choice, and this one cost me clean. I drove straight to a public place with bright lights, and I told an adult clerk behind a counter that a district building had someone trapped in a basement, and I had printed proof in a folder marked with compliance language. I didn't say the building name out loud. I said enough for them to call help without me being the only witness, and I left the printed pages in their hands before fear could make me take them back. The contract died that morning. My supervisor called twice, then stopped. My badge stopped opening doors. A paycheck didn't show up. A week later, my phone photos didn't reappear. The locked folders on my phone vanished like they'd never existed. The email I'd tried to forward never showed in sent, not even a failed attempt. My partner asked why I jumped at small sounds in quiet rooms, and I lied again because some habits are hard to kill. The maintenance worker from that night texted once to say they were alive, then their number went dead. A thin envelope arrived at my apartment mailbox 2 days after. Paper crisp. No stamp. Inside sat a new laminated card, edges sharp, plastic still glossy. The card had a revision tag printed at the bottom, Rev 5.3, and the quote on it was the same line from the locker graffiti, now made official. Earplugs stay in. The card also had a faint symbol in one corner, a simple mark like a vent mouth drawn as a triangle with 2 lines. I'd never seen it before that night. Now I saw it in my mind every time I closed my eyes. My hands shook holding that card, and I couldn't stop thinking about how easily a system can turn a warning into policy. A second thought came right behind it, colder. If the system moved that card to my mailbox, it could move it anywhere. Later, digging through the closet, I found a binder tab I'd never taken from work, tucked behind my winter boots. The tab had the same symbol printed on it, and the typed header line mentioned a different facility. Not a school, not even the same part of town. The phrase on the first page matched the locker graffiti exactly. Earplugs stay in. If that symbol shows up again, do not ignore it. My survivor question sits in my throat like a stone, because nobody answered it for me. How many other buildings are running the same test? I just realized the boiler room door in that hallway never had an air vent, so that cough had to come through something else.